everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm going to give a caveat at the beginning that I am far from an embodied carbon expert, unlike the people you've heard speak before me. I do work at the American Institute of Architects, but I'm not an architect, so I depend on the architects to help me with things that are really complicated, like embodied carbon. So just an FYI, I am an expert on the politics piece, so that's what I'm going to present on today. And I will be happy to answer questions afterwards or in the future if you have them. So just a little bit of legislative history. This is a bill that goes back to 2018. And for a bill that's complicated and that's hard to get a lot of support on, this is the process that bills go through. So they bring them in an initial year, it moves a little bit or not. They bring it back the next year. And it just keeps going until it passes. And I have no doubt that this bill will pass. A embodied carbon bill will pass. You can see the bill from this year is 1103 in the lower left of the screen. And it has died this year, but we're making progress slowly. I will make one note that the first bill and possibly the second one in 2019, I can't remember exactly, but they were labeled by clean and the by fair wasn't added, I think, until 2021. So that's a difference that you've seen as this bill has gone through the process, and we will talk about by fair a little bit going forward. So 2022, we actually had two embodied carbon bills, and I don't know how many people expected that to be the case. It was a little bit of a surprise. So these are the two sponsors, one in the House and one in the Senate. Representative Davina Dewar is an architect, of which a fact of which I'm very proud. I tell people we don't talk about Davina Dewar unless we say Davina Dewar, the architect, because we like to throw that out there. She actually will bring up code when she talks about bills, and once she brought up the arduous architect licensing process. So she brings her architect background into the legislature. She took over the embodied carbon bill from Beth Dolio, who was a state legislator from Olympia, who left the House to run for Congress, and gave a lot of her climate portfolio to Representative Dewar when she arrived. Representative Dewar, just so you know, is from Bothell. And Lisa Wellman is from Mercer Island, and she's been in the legislature for a long time. She, this year, came up with a bill on embodied carbon that I don't think anybody expected. And as often is the case, legislators maybe talk to a constituent that gets them jazzed about a bill. In this case, she went to some kind of conference where she got jazzed about embodied carbon, and so she had a bill. And we'll talk about both of these bills. A little look at political decision-making around embodied carbon this year. As you have just heard, the CLF work is still in progress on the reporting system and the case studies, so those were not done. There was a question among advocates as to whether we wanted to have a work session in which we would just talk about the bills, have CLF come in and do a report, versus a hearing where there was an actual bill that was heard. The goal for advocates was that they wanted to get a bill out of the Appropriations Committee, which is where it has gotten stuck in recent years. We did not meet that goal, but that was the goal. So the existing bill was HB 1103 that many of you know. That is Davina Dewar's bill, and it is a carryover from last year. So bills that are introduced in the even years carry over into the odd years. But after the odd year, sorry, the other way around, bills introduced in the odd year carry over to the even year. But after the even year, they will die. So HB 1103 will not come back in that form with the number 1103, but it is very likely to come back with a different number. The primary objective this year for advocates was maintaining bill visibility, making sure legislators were hearing about it. Even if the bill did not pass, I don't know that anybody expected it to go all the way, but maintaining that visibility as legislators hear about environmental bills and keep thinking about those bills. So the decision was made to rerun HB 1103. It was substituted, which just means that an amended version was put forward. The Senate bill was a surprise, as I told you, and we'll walk through that Senate bill. And then there's a question about the labor reporting provisions, the by fair. It's a unique aspect to Washington's bills. I don't believe that California or Oregon have those in their embodied carbon work. And there's a lot of question about whether those provisions are bringing the bill down or not. And I can't answer that question other than what they do is bring labor on board and allow sort of a larger coalition. Democrats feel strongly about those labor provisions, so that helps get Democratic support. So I will say that early in the fall, at one point, Davina Dore told me they were out, and then she told me they were back in. So there's definitely some discussion on labor and whether that those provisions will stay. Just a brief overview of the bills. Senate Bill 5659, Lisa Wellman's bill, it was much stronger. And Davina Dore talked to me about this, and I think many of you probably about this being a good cop, bad cop situation. So her good cop bill would only require submittal of EPDs, but would not require there to be a value for global warming potential that had to be met, that couldn't be exceeded. So that was a huge difference in those two bills. They both had reporting on labor practices, and they both had requirement of EPDs, and we'll go into a little bit of the details on those in the next few slides. So this is the Senate bill by Lisa Wellman. Just as a reminder, it did not come out of committee. It did have a hearing, which is, legislators want their bills to have hearings in committee and to discuss it and bring it up and perhaps come back with it again another year. So it did do that. So this this shows the pieces on EPDs. So the date for compliance was 2024, January 2024. The Department of Commerce will be tasked with setting the maximum acceptable global warming potential value for each product. And that was set at the 20th percentile value for each product category. And right here, you get complicated for legislators, like really complicated, because they don't know, they don't have the background that you do in kind of working with materials. But this is as easy as we can state it. So that means better than 80% of the products in that category. The bill would have required values to be reviewed every 3 years and adjusted downward if industry had improved. There's the list of eligible products. This is pretty standard. So Davina Dore's bill also has the same list of eligible products. And then the awarding authorities are different in each bill, but they're similar but different. So for the Senate bill, it was a state agency that had a contract for a public works project, and then institutions of higher education that also had a contract for public works. And so here were the requirements by July 2024. Bid specs had to include a requirement related to global warming potential. Bidders had to submit current EPDs for each project. They couldn't be installed without an EPD. It's pretty strong. And then there were exemptions. And I will say that in legislation, often things aren't defined. So there's an exemption if a project it's technically infeasible for a material to have an EPD. That's not defined. It will be up to the agency to define that. And in this case, I'm pretty sure it will be Commerce. It could be wrong. So there are some language around exemptions, but they're not well defined, is my point on that one. And then they would encourage compliance, but not require it again until July 2024. Here's a look at the labor provisions. So the labor language is different in each bill, but they do require manufacturers to report on labor practices at each facility where products are manufactured. And there's language in both bills about the International Labor Organization's core labor standards. And you see the labor standards down below. Some of these materials are manufactured in Asia and other countries where some of these things do hit. There's some difficulty in complying with. So again, this language is a little iffy in the bills, but it does require under the Senate bill providing supplier codes of conduct for manufacturers or reporting on measures taken to comply. And here's the status of the bill. So you can see down below, it was heard in the Senate Committee on State Government. One thing to know about these bills, and even I forget, they do not go through the environmental committees. And the reason is because if it impacts state projects and state money, they go through either the capital budget committee or the Senate, the state government committee, and then they will go to a fiscal committee. So it's a little bit unusual in that they're hitting committees that aren't used to thinking about environment policy in the same way as members of the environment committee. So it was heard in committee and didn't go further than that. It wasn't even scheduled for a vote. So essentially they knew that there wouldn't be votes for this and they did not schedule them. Here's a look at Davina Dore's substitute bill for 1103 this year. This has the title by Clean by Fair, Washington. The other bill does not. So the awarding authorities, you can see them here, they're a little bit different. And one thing to point out for the Department of Transportation is that it's buildings and not paving. That's a key thing. This bill has information on covered projects. The Senate bill does not. So there's a definition of construction projects as being over 50,000 gross square feet, or what would qualify as a building renovation project under this bill. And then again, the eligible products are exactly the same as in the Senate bill. So in terms of EPDs, the contractors, and this is a point I should have made earlier, is it's always the contractors who have to comply. They are responsible for complying. They have to submit EPDs for at least 90% of the cost of eligible products. Essentially by 2022, they are required before substantial completion, and by 2023, they are required before installation. Again, a lot easier to comply than in the Senate bill. Data has to include health product declarations, and there's another out in this bill if reporting requirements cannot be met. Contractors have to report on efforts to obtain the data. So again, there's not a strong definition of what they have to do to report, but that would be determined by the implementing agency. And here's a look at the labor provisions for 1103. Again, it hits that 90% of the cost of eligible products. And there's a very specific language about the number of things that have to be reported on. So average number of employees, the wage, the work week, the maximum number of hours that an employee works, a whole host of things that are very specific. And then there is also language that requires labor reporting to include all materials and upstream ingredients. So 80% of cradle to grave embodied emissions. And it's particularly difficult for concrete because they report not only for the batch plant, but they also have to then report for the cement plant that supplies that batch plant. So it gets tricky and it gets hard. And I will say that, you know, a lot of the material suppliers will come in and say, this is impossible, we can't get this. And it's up to folks like you to be able to offer your expertise in what is possible and what is not. And here's the status of this bill. You can see under bill history that in 2021, it passed capital budget and made it to appropriations. It did not have to go back to capital budget this year because we're in the 2-year cycle. So it went back to appropriations. And it did have a vote scheduled, but they didn't take a vote, which again means they knew that it would not pass. So just a couple slides on the politics of embodied carbon. And I'm going to walk through the issues up here in the box. So the issues for folks, both pro and con on embodied carbon, are that this is clearly the next big emissions target. We are working a lot in the state on getting emissions from buildings down, but embodied carbon is a place that we just haven't put a lot of emphasis on, particularly from policy. There's issues around, particularly for contractors and suppliers. What are the costs of complying? Is it feasible to comply? There are lots of back and forth on those two pieces. There will be arguments from opposition folks that this puts Washington at a competitive disadvantage, or it puts the material suppliers at a competitive disadvantage. And you'll hear from others that it puts suppliers at an advantage because it they already would have the EPD values baked in. And then the last point for both sides is that this is a little bit of a slippery slope policy. Material suppliers and and contractors worry that there will be a slippery slope aspect to this, and that it will lead to product comparisons instead of just within a product comparison. And to be honest, that's true. I mean, that's what a lot of us are hoping happens towards the end of this policy journey. So those are some of the things that people are really thinking about when they talk about this. And you can see the list of supporters here. Lots of enviro groups, labor groups are strong because of the Buy Fair piece. And steel actually did come around this year, which is good. We've been working, we as an industry have been working with material suppliers on this for quite some time. Individuals like you, a lot of you from the AEC industry, AIA has been a strong supporter of this legislation. On the opposition side, really wood and concrete are the key materials that are kind of struggling to come around on this legislation. I put the Masonry Institute because they sign up and speak at hearings. But those are the big ones. And then just FYI, the Carbon Leadership Forum cannot lobby on bills like this because they're a 501c3. It puts their 501c3 status in jeopardy. So they depend on individuals like you to do that specific work in reaching out to officials. More politics. All Republicans will vote no, make no mistake about it. on embodied carbon or any climate legislation right now in our legislature. So it's really looking at Democrats and what they will do. They have a strong majority in the House, so they can afford to lose some people from more rural areas who can vote no on an environmental bill, and it will still pass. We saw that this year. The Senate, there's a little bit less of a margin, so it's always a little more iffy in the Senate. And this shows you my own bias toward the Environment Committee, because I put information about the Environment Committee when these bills don't actually go there. But we do have a very active House Environment Committee. The Senate Committee is strong. We will have a new Senate chair for the Environment Committee next year. Ruben Carlisle is retiring. And the other committees are less, the committees that these bills go through are less focused on environmental issues, not surprisingly. So there's a lot of education opportunity there. And again, those key issues that we talk to legislators about all the time are cost and feasibility. I can't emphasize enough how much education is needed for legislators. They finally are at the point where they understand that buildings cause greenhouse gas emissions. They get it, they talk about it in their committees, and it's really exciting to see because that wasn't always the case, but they do not understand embodied carbon, not at all. They don't have a sense of urgency about it. It's very complicated, and they don't quite get it, and I don't blame them. So my message to you is that AEC practitioners can make this case in a different way than environmental groups. Environmental groups are great in their passion and in their focus on getting grassroots out there, but they can't speak to the technical aspects of something this complicated. And you can, and that has a lot of value for legislators. And this is my last slide. So I would just encourage you to engage in outreach, meet your legislators outside of session and talk about embodied carbon. They actually like to meet with their constituents. It's much better to meet with them out of session than in session because they just don't have time to focus on things. You can do it as a group. I encourage you to figure out ways to simplify the message around embodied carbon because it is so complicated. Take them on a tour of a building. They love that kind of thing. They particularly love to be able to take pictures and put it in their little newsletter. So that is great to the extent that it makes sense. And then I really encourage you to advocate during the sessions. You can sign in, you can testify. And I have an example of Alex Yanchenko, who actually is on this call right now. This is my favorite picture of Alex because she's testifying on HB 1103 last year. And she testified this year too, but it wasn't a good enough photo. So I use this photo a lot. Architects, engineers, others from industry have a lot of credibility when it comes to testifying on bills and talking to legislators. I cannot emphasize that enough. Email your legislators is another easy thing that you can do. Some advanced outreach is focus on legislators from specific committees, see where your legislator sits. They sit on a committee that considers this legislation, and I'm happy to help you walk through that and figure that out. Even more important to meet with them. Those of you, if you're from Tacoma or Spokane, you have really strong leadership members in your district, and those ones are great people to target because they make the decision about what moves in their body. You are absolutely welcome to use me as a resource. I can help you figure out where your legislators are on this issue, who is best to conduct outreach, who you should outreach to. I can help you set up meetings. I'm happy to do that. And then the last item is another important thing, which is talk to your professional associations director. If your association particularly does not support embodied carbon, most AEC organizations are opposed. And I know this because I sit in meetings with them and hear them talk about embodied carbon. And I wrote this little note to myself, be like Dave Walsh, I would remember to tell you the story, which is I got a call maybe 3 years ago from AGC, their top lobbyist, which is the Contractors. And he said to me, have you heard of this Dave Walsh? And I said, yeah, I know Dave. And he said, he's talking to me about embodied carbon. And it made me laugh because Dave is doing exactly what he should do, is using his position within the industry and talking to that individual who has a lot of power in the association. And he made AGC, I want to say single-handedly, he made them have to rethink where they were on embodied carbon. You have the power to do that. They have to listen to their members. So I encourage you to do that, to have that conversation, at least see where they are, because a lot of times, these are associations that have a lot of power and they're opposing bills in a pretty powerful way. And if they have to think about it twice, it would make a big difference. So these are my list of suggestions. And again, reach out to me if you have questions about how to go about these things. I'm happy to help. Thank you.